9mm specialty loads. That's what we're going to talk about today. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns, ammunition, hunting, defense, all manner of things, the right way, with God Almighty at the center, biblical, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. On that, blessed to serve you today, and my background, military, law enforcement, private security, contracting, competition shooting, hunting, guiding, and I try and share that experience here with you. As you might imagine, I have a fair bit of experience with 9mm. The typical loads for 9mm, range from 115 grain to 147 grain. Those are the typical grain weights, and generally, you're talking about your practice, range fodder, 115 grain, full metal jacket, or your defensive loads. I would say all fairly common, 115, 124, even today, 135, and 147 grains. That's not what we're going to talk about today. Those are your standard. We're going to talk about some other loads for the 9mm and when you might want to use them. And it's probably not the majority of the time, right? Specialty uses. Let's talk about frangible ammunition. When do you use frangible ammunition? When you're running a shoot house, right? That's the common one. If you're doing shoot house training where you're shooting in really close confined areas, kind of what frangible 9mm was designed for. It's still a common use for it if you have something like the plaster targets or your indoor targets that you're shooting at really close range. That's a good case for frangible ammunition. Another one that's kind of off the reservation you may not think about is if you want to do some varmint hunting with your 9mm. It's pretty devastating, right? It's basically what a varmint grenade round is in a rifle. It's a frangible type ammo with a jacket. Well, frangible 9mm on very small varmints. I'm talking ground squirrels, prairie dogs. That kind of hunting with a handgun can be a lot of fun. And the frangible ammunition for that is assuming you test it and know that you can hit what you're shooting at with it, because it may shoot a different point of aim, point of impact. You have to test it. Can be very ethical and very good way to get some hunting in and some reps in if you want to do some varmint hunting, some pest control. So frangible for that. No, I don't recommend it for home defense because of overpenetration. Stop with the whole overpenetration thing. That's about as annoying and overblown as the BC, ballistic coefficient in rifles, has become. Anything that is going to stop somebody trying to kill you can go through a wall. I'd hate to tell you that, but it's true. I can punch a hole through a wall. Most regular houses, right? I can punch a hole through drywall. I can kick a hole through drywall. I cannot punch or kick a hole through your torso, right? I don't care what stupid kung fu movies you've seen or AI generated stuff. You can't punch through somebody. I can punch through drywall. Anything that's going to stop a human being trying to kill you is going to go through a wall or two. What's the remedy? Hit your target. I know that was kind of a rabbit hole there, but I do not recommend for home defense birdshot or frangible ammunition or varmint rounds or frangible 9mm. That's not what it's for. But again, it does have its place. Frangible 9mm ammo. How about birdshot 9mm ammo? What is this used for? If you're not familiar, they make 9mm with little shot capsules that have birdshot in it. Again, not for home defense, right? Most of this will not cycle. I have never seen it cycle well in a semi-auto 9mm. But for pest control, where a single shot is fine. If you are doing something like dispatching a pest in a building, in a barn, you go to open your barn and grab a bale of hay or whatever, and there's a bunch of rats in there, or there's a big snake in there. They can be decent for that because you don't want to do extra damage, because you don't want to you're shooting around a tractor or hydraulic hoses or whatever it is, right? And you don't want to punch through those, or you don't want to worry about the ricochet of a regular round. Though birdshot rounds can be pretty good for that. They're not very impressive as far as lethality goes. Very close range on small rodents, mice, rats, the head of a snake, right? They can be useful for that. That's what they're useful for. Those, 9mm shot capsules. And do not expect it to cycle in your gun. Expect to shoot one round and do a tap rack bang or a tap roll rack or tap rack reassess, whatever cool guy acronym you want to put on there. but expect it to just be a single shot. But it's still a very tiny shot capsule that can be good for small pests at close range. I mentioned handgun hunting is something that I really, really enjoy. I have been blessed to take more deer with handguns than I can remember, and not with giant big bore revolvers, with regular like handguns that I carry and train with, because that's what I carry on me most of the time, so that's what I should be good with. And I've taken, I know people are going to get mad at this, but I've taken ethically deer with 9mm, 40 Smith & Wesson, 45 ACP, 38 Special, but there are better loads for this than your typical loads that you might think of. One would be a heavy for caliber, so I like 147 grain, but not like an expanding hollow point if I'm just doing it for this, but like something like a hard cast semi-wad cutter or a copper plated 147 grain flat nosed bullet for penetration for things like that. If you are, and I'm not suggesting that you do or do not, right? But if you are going to carry a handgun for bear defense, I'm going to tell you that you're probably better off, assuming you train now and are good with the handgun you carry, which you should be because you're carrying it to save your life and other people's lives. If you're competent and confident with the handgun that you carry and it's a 9mm, you're probably better off carrying that for bear defense than some giant big bore revolver. And I have a big bore. I have a 454 Casull, right? I don't often carry it for bear defense. I don't think I ever carried it for bear defense because I'm not as good with it, right? So you're better off with the handgun you're confident and competent with than some giant abomination that you never practice with. Says me. You can emote in the comments about that if you don't like it. But if you're going to do that, a good load would be something like 147 grain hard cast, or similar, a key style semi-wad cutter, or a flat-fronted, bullet like that. They just tend to penetrate straighter and deeper. So that would be another 9mm specialty load. There are some really hot 9mm loads that I have run in the past. I've carried these on duty. I don't generally recommend them, and I don't carry them anymore. But back when I had, the government buying me free ammo and I could practice a ton with them, I carried, I had carried 9mm plus P plus, which is, I wrote the manufacturer at the time. I was using Federal plus P plus, and I wrote the manufacturer, and I wish I could remember what the PSI was on there, but it was high. One reason I don't recommend it is hard on your guns. Your gun may or may not be able to handle it, so you had better make sure. I would suggest writing the manufacturer and making sure. But another one is it's got a very different recoil impulse. And again, the gun and ammo combination that you're good with. So it's probably going to recoil very differently than your standard 9mm. So the plus P plus is even hotter than plus P. Obviously, it can be very, very hot. And I don't generally recommend it because it's expensive. And there's generally not practice loads for it, right? You're probably not shooting the same place with your 115 grain, Winchester white box as your 9mm plus P plus is shooting. And it's kind of important that you hit where you're aiming. So I don't generally recommend this. But if you just have a blue sky budget, or you can afford to buy cases of it to practice with, or Uncle Sam is buying your ammo, it can be a good round. It can be, if you want a really hot, zippy 9mm. Like a Federal 9B PLE. That's what I used to run. Not the coolest marketing name, but it's not meant for marketing hype, right? It's not, it's not meant for that. It's meant to put people down. It has a very good street record, very good street cred. That's the Federal 9B PLE. There's also, I'm aware of the Winchester Ranger 127 grain plus P plus. They're very impressive rounds ballistically, at least as far as like foot-pounds of energy compared to standard 9mm. Now, again, I don't generally recommend them. I don't think you need them. I think standard 9mm is probably the best balance of shootability and affordability and effectiveness. It's a standard for a reason. And what I'm certainly not suggesting is that you practice with your 115 grain ball and then load up your magazine with 9mm plus P or plus P plus that you've never tested, never trained with, never shot a bunch of. Stick with regular ammunition, for not the full metal jacket for defense, but get a load that shoots the same point of aim, point of impact, and has the same recoil impulse as your practice ammo. A good pairing, right? And I'm not sponsored by any of these companies, right? But something like Spear Gold Dot, 147 grain, and Spear Lawman, 147 grain. Because they're meant to be paired together. And one's affordable and one's a really good defensive load. Doesn't have to be that, but something like that. That's what I generally recommend. It's the standard for a reason. And if you're curious about the normal grain weights, I've done a whole episode on that 115 grain versus 124 grain versus 147 grain. A whole episode just on comparing the different grain weights and different things. But in keeping with today's episode, the standards are the standards for a reason. You may decide you want a plus B plus for whatever reason. Running it in a carbine might be one, right? You got a longer barrel. You want a little bit more velocity. You want to use it a little bit more like a rifle. That could be a reason why you want to run that plus B plus. You're going to sight in that gun with that ammo, and you're going to buy a bunch of it to practice with. You want a little bit flatter trajectory, a little bit longer max point blank range for your 9mm carbine. That could be one. Now, they do make 9mm tracer loads. The use case for these would be just for fun or just to better understand and demonstrate if you're an instructor, like and you're shooting a night class or an evening class, you can demonstrate ballistics pretty well with those, like showing trajectory, like visually if you have a long enough range. That's a pretty cool and useful tool for the 9mm tracer rounds. Really, the only practical thing I could think of for these would be something we might do in the military. If you were like a squad leader, you might have a magazine of tracers, a fire team leader, and if you wanted to paint a target like everybody should be shooting at this window, then you would switch to that mag and shoot that window, and everybody would know, hey, we're all supposed to shoot at that window because there's a bad dude in that window, or whatever. There's a machine gun over there, whatever the case is. That's something we would do in the GWAT. Another thing that is not often done, but is done, is you might put a tracer in your like second to third before your last round in your magazine. So when you're running low, this is not real important on handguns because it's very, very rare for, especially civilian defensive handguns that you're going to shoot an entire magazine and have to do a speed reload. Not really a thing. Going back to that carbine though, if for some reason you're running a 9 PCC carbine in your mutual assistance group or something and you wanted to put a tracer, your second to third round in your second to third to last round in your magazine. So when you see the tracer, I'm about out of ammo. I had better do a speed reload. That could be a thing. And that's a very niche scenario, but we're kind of talking about niche rounds and niche scenarios today. So that may be a practical use for 9mm tracers. I can't think of any that I forgot. But there's always like this super new game-changing that's not defensive ammo. If it says like game-changing or revolutionary, I'd probably stay away from it. It's kind of a red flag for me. But like the frangible ammo, the super light for caliber, like there's some like aluminum bullets that are like 9mm, super lightweight, super high velocity. If you just want to play with them as a range toy, go ahead. But I wouldn't recommend you carry them for defense. So there are things like that. That's not what I'm talking about. Again, going back to 9mm defensive use, get a good 9mm defensive load, 115, 124, 135, 147 that's proven, that's got a good track record, that's got a good, amount of testing behind it. That's what I recommend. And I know I've said that several times, but I think it's important. If you're going to carry a handgun on your hip to defend yourself and your loved ones and society as a whole against evil, you should put some thought and get a good defensive load, not some marketing hype thing. It's an important decision. And with that, let's wrap it up with a couple of tactical verses of the day. One, key one is, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is another verse that some translation that I've seen translated that I like is, you shall not stand idly by while someone takes the life of your neighbor. Right? If you shall love your neighbor as yourself, if somebody was taking your life, you probably want somebody to stand up for you and help you. Right? If somebody's taking your neighbor's life, should we not love them as ourselves and stand up for them? I would submit we should. I would submit that being willing to risk your life for someone else's life is a pretty good, view of sacrificial love and loving your neighbor as yourself. With that, men, thank you for listening and have a blessed day.